Hello, I'm Nicola Watson of Care for the Family, and I've been asked to spend some time considering the impact that COVID-19 is having on the way that we process bereavement and how we can offer support to those experiencing loss during this time when everything about grieving is so unfamiliar. My life changed significantly nearly 2 years ago when my husband of 37 years, Alan, died of cancer. The day of Alan's funeral gave me such a wonderful springboard for the continuation of my grief journey. But it has not been an option for many for so long now, and that is why we need to take time to consider how we offer our support. Now I recognise we are not taking on the same scale of loss, but Matthew Reed, Chief Exec of Marie Curie, has said, "The failure to address grief after the Second World War has had widespread consequences for generations of Britons. The problem must not be allowed to recur." So what we can do by way of support, we need to do well and thoughtfully, and that's exactly what we're going to explore as we continue. I believe it was our Queen who said, "Grief is the price we pay for love." And personally, I would add, it's a very high price indeed. We asked some people to try to describe what grief looked like for them, and this is what they said.
Well, I guess if it was a colour, it'd be black. You know, where you've lost hope for anything to be right again.
Like grief is an intense shock, initially lots of numbness, very painful both emotionally and physically, so physically feeling pain everywhere.
Goodness, no one warns you the physicality of it, how you sort of felt your legs buckle underneath you, how you're sort of pain in the gut.
It was just all encompassing really. It's quite a lot of physical things, like a sort of ache, heartache I suppose.
Grief was about an emotional shutdown, in that I just felt closed off and completely shut down my emotions. And I also felt quite a lot of grief in that and guilt as well.
It's hard to be brief because there were so many different emotions.
Grief was horrid. It was the most traumatic and emotional experience I've ever been through.
Grief felt like a blur, something that wasn't happening. I often think it's like one of those sort of time-lapse films where you're walking in one direction and the rest of the world is walking in the other direction. That time is standing still for you, but everything else is just happily going on around you.
Life just wasn't normal for me, and it was very painful. And I think what surprised me most was that the actual physical pain that I felt. It was, you know, I'd expected something else, but the physical pain was just a real shock.
I suppose the main thing is the pain. You know, I've heard the expression heartbroken, not really knew what it meant. But when you lose somebody you love so much, it's an almost unbearable pain. It's pain that's there when you go to bed, and when you wake up in the morning you think it's never going to go away.
Let's talk a bit about funerals. As I said earlier, my husband's funeral and service of thanksgiving that followed brought me a huge amount of comfort. But under COVID-19 restrictions, such a public event is no longer possible. So how can a family pay tribute to one they have lost and take the first steps on the journey towards acceptance and recovery? It's really good to see people making very innovative use of online communications so that relatives and friends can participate irrespective of their actual location. Take, for example, the funeral of a young woman who sadly died from cancer. The private committal at the crematorium was attended by the very closest of family members. But they planned and arranged a service of thanksgiving, which was broadcast online later that afternoon. And the service included photos and videos compiled by one of her closest friends, pre-recorded tributes from her parents, some of her favourite worship songs led by another friend from his home, and a live-streamed Bible message of comfort from the leader of her church. There was even an invitation at the end to donate online to 2 charities that were close to her heart. How wonderful was that? And then another family arranged for a kind of socially distanced guard of honour for their loved one. They chose a place in town that held precious memories of their loved one, and then let everyone who knew him know when the hearse would pass by, and suggested people might like to simply clap him on his way. A friend of mine who attended said it released a huge amount of emotion. Social distancing was maintained, and wider friends were able to participate and show their support. Isn't that good? I also read of a woman who, discovering her neighbour had died and seeing firsthand how distressed the widow was, popped a little note through all the neighbours' doors explaining the situation. And she enclosed a luggage tag, and she asked each one of them to write a memory or a message of comfort on the tag before putting it back through her letterbox. She was delighted to discover that the whole street got involved, and the lady tied each tag to some branches that she'd arranged in a large vase, which was left for the widow, who was encouraged and overwhelmed by the sweet comfort this brought her. Isn't that kind? We are by nature relational beings, and in times of grief we want to be close to one another. We need to be together, to place a hand on an arm or a shoulder, to shake a hand, to offer a hug, to embrace. But right now we cannot offer one another the comfort and reassurance this brings. So we must work extra hard to find ways to reduce feelings of isolation. It's vital to reach out to one another, to pick up the phone, to send a card, to write a letter, to leave a meal or a gift on the doorstep. And if they can bear it, to arrange to meet up with the bereaved for a socially distanced chat or a walk. Because bereavement is such an individual journey, it can be really difficult to know how to offer the right support. Some people withdraw and don't want to talk to anybody, and others just can't bear to be alone and crave constant contact. Actually, it's not even as simple as that. Need for either solitude or company can alter in the same hour. So the chances are, if you do attempt to make contact, sometimes you'll get it right and sometimes wrong, but don't stop trying. And then what to say? Well, often there are no words, and yet silence does need to be filled. And then what you say to me today may be a source of comfort, and tomorrow a provocation to anger or indignation. Not that you'd know, but I remember that happened to me when someone referred to Alan as the love of my life, which indeed he was, but it simply was not the way we ever framed our relationship. It was far too Hollywood, far too cliché. And on reflection, my strong reaction was due to the fact that if the person speaking had known Alan, she would have known better than to use that phrase. So, if you're worried about what to say, here's some things you may like to avoid.
People say things like, oh, he's in a better place, or because my son would have had special needs, said, well, you wouldn't want him anyway because he would have had needs, so at least you haven't got to put up with that.
There was a family that we're really close to. Their daughter was our Lizzie's best friend, and we'd known them for years. They'd grown up together, and I was, a good friend with the father. It was about 3 months after Lizzie died, and he came up to me and said, Steve, I think it was about time you drew a line and moved on.
And the things I found most unhelpful was you'd be strong, you'd be doing this and you'd have done that. And you'd have a moment where you just need to break, and whoever you were with, if I'd say, oh, I'm really struggling today, or I'd need a little cry, if the response was, come on now, Claire, you've been so strong, come on, it just didn't validate that what I needed was a hug. and I've been so strong, but right now I'm not strong and I need you.
Older people would sometimes say to me, oh well, at least you could have another child, which was really not helpful. Or they'd look at the subsequent children I'd have and say, oh, one of each.
The most unhelpful, I suppose, was the fact that people thought that they were feeling what you were feeling and I wasn't feeling, so it jarred a bit in terms of, I think people standing on the outside looking in were reacting from where they were standing rather than from where I was standing, and that wasn't helpful at times.
The trouble is, people try to make it better, people try to rationalise it, and any answer that starts off with the words, oh, at least, somehow is empty.
So one of the most hurtful things that was said to me was not said in any intention of being hurtful at all. She said to me, you know, we were so sorry when your husband died last year, and I want you to know, you know, we were all praying for you and we were all caring about you so much. And I thought, it's still agony every single day.
The very best thing you can do is listen. You'd be amazed how few people do that well. If you have your own experience of loss, don't share it unless invited to do so. I know how hard that is. But every bereavement is different and reactions are likely to change, so don't assume you know how the person is feeling. Let them tell you. It's simple. Ask, how are you feeling today? Ask, would you like to talk about your loved one? Ask if they would like to talk about the circumstances leading up to the death. Ask how they've been coping since and how are they feeling now. Of course, you don't want to interrogate, but it's good to be interested in their story, as telling their story may help them process their loss. Be kind. Look, I know that's obvious, but say kind things. Do kind things. Give little gifts that help the grieving person feel special and feel loved. I am, on the whole, a pretty positive person. But even now, nearly 2 years on, I have moments when I simply don't want to go on without Alan. And acts of kindness can help make life feel worth living. I have friends who lead a big, busy church. But several times in that first summer after Alan died, they came over and spent the day working with me in the garden. Now, I knew they were praying for me, but that practical help with a task that I found overwhelming by myself just was invaluable. I still get emotional over the lawnmower. If you can do so safely, under the current guidance, offer practical help. Shopping, a meal, a socially distant walk with a dog, or a chat over the garden gate. Make suggestions about what and when. Avoid saying, well, let me know if you need anything. I'd be happy to pop by any time. You probably won't, unless you set a time and date, which can of course be postponed or changed if the person is not feeling up to it. Be prepared for the long haul. The journey of grief is a long and winding road, and the hardest days are not necessarily those closest to the death. Birthdays, anniversaries, Christmas, they're hard, but ordinary rainy days and Mondays, especially bank holidays, sneak up and floor you unexpectedly. You know, sometimes that terrible sense of loss gets worse before it gets better. And honestly, most support drops off pretty rapidly, especially if you appear to be okay. Here are some things to say and do that can be helpful when you're grieving.
I think people coming in and saying, I can't imagine how you're feeling. and just sort of acknowledging that the experience that I'm having is different to anything that they've experienced.
Anyone who would listen, anyone who would talk to me normally, and yeah, the ones I valued most were the people who joined me in this weird world of grief.
I think the most helpful thing that ever happened was my friends taking me to a room and playing video games in complete silence. And no one said anything, no one tried to make it better with some words, but they just knew that it was awful and wanted to sit with me and share that time with me.
I think the most helpful thing was not saying anything and just being there practically to help cook or look after me or giving me a hug or crying with me. So not necessarily having to say something or just listening to me ramble on.
I've actually learned to walk slowly through the grief landscape. I've learned to do self-care, to actually sit with emotions. I made a choice to embrace the pain.
Probably the practical things, so not just saying, oh, let me know if there's anything I could do to help, but actually saying, I'll come round at such and such a time and I'll bring some shopping, or let's go out for a coffee, and actually planning it, so that was really helpful.
It was a huge find to me when Care for the Family began their work, which I think was when about 17 years ago, and they first began their work with young widows, and that was helpful beyond belief.
So, to summarise, loss needs to be processed. Some people, if their grief is complex, may need specialist help. I found it really helpful to have some counselling and would recommend that, especially when the cultural norms we usually associate with bereavement are just not possible. Most people do come through well if they are supported well by friends and family who encourage and reassure them and share their journey as much as they possibly can, gradually making adjustments and easing them into a new reality. If you want to help someone along their bereavement journey, encourage them in these ways. Encourage them to stay connected. Try to speak regularly. There is, of course, the good old-fashioned telephone and a variety of apps. House Party, Zoom, Skype, to name a few. Set up a family or family and friends WhatsApp group. Grief needs to be validated, to be witnessed. So video calls with people you love and trust will make that a possibility. Yeah, let's make some plans for the future. Plans to have a family celebration when this is all over. It'll give the bereaved something to look forward to and to focus on. So stay connected, but also encourage them to get some exercise. Strange though it sounds, you are likely to feel less isolated if you can get out of your house and into nature. Now, lots of people have got on their bikes in these last few months. And about 9 months after Alan died, I knew I had to do something physical that was going to help my own mental well-being. Well, I joined a community choir, which is not that physical, but then I downloaded the Couch to 5K app, and slowly, very slowly, I started pounding the pavements around my home. I don't always enjoy it, but I do find my head is clearer, and weirdly I have more energy and less hopelessness. If you can't get out or you don't want to get out, there are lots of online exercise classes right now. Give them a go. Find one that suits your health, age and stage. So stay connected, try to get some exercise, and see if you can capture some memories. I made a photo book uploading lots of precious memories into a format that I can share with others. Reminders of happy family times, which when I look at sometimes make me cry, but mostly make me smile. I am so grateful for the life we lived, the happiness we knew, and the love we shared. And research confirms that grateful people tend to experience greater positive emotions. So, without being condescending or patronising, encourage an attitude of gratitude. And then lastly, perhaps most importantly, keep reminding them they are not alone. Yeah, we are temporarily separated by the virus, separated physically, but it is possible, with effort on both sides, to remain emotionally, and as the lockdown eases a little, even socially connected. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I really hope you found this helpful and that you feel better equipped as a result. There's so much more we could talk about and consider. So I'd really like to take this opportunity to tell you about Care for the Family's Bereavement Care Awareness course. This is an existing resource that we will soon be making available online to help develop knowledge, to increase skills and build confidence and understanding, to provide the appropriate levels of ongoing support for people who've suffered a bereavement. You can of course find details of it on the Care for the Family website. And we also offer telephone befriending support for bereaved parents and those who've been widowed young. So please visit our website and check these out too. You can also find help from cruise.org.uk, ataloss.org and thegoodgrieftrust.org, all of which have dedicated COVID-19 pages. Thank you for all your time on behalf of all those who experience the deep pain and loss of bereavement and who will benefit from the loving support you are committed to offer them. Thank you.